He had the evidence, he had the names, he had the truth in his hands, and when his boss told him to sign the lie, he didn't. He just walked away. He told himself that was enough. He moved to Montana, raised horses, and spent 2 years convincing himself that the 7 men who died in that shaft were not his responsibility. And then, on a back road in a blizzard, a woman drove a knife into a broken wagon board and used it to pull herself to her feet. And Cole Hargrove understood, for the first time, what enough actually looked like. This is a channel for exactly this kind of story, where the West is not just landscape, but the place where people discover what they're still capable of. Walking away from a lie is not the same as standing up for the truth. Sometimes it takes years, and a stranger in the snow, to know the difference. Subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Has there ever been a moment that brought you back to something you walked away from?
Cole Hargrove had one simple rule about the East Ridge Road in December. He stayed clear of it. It was a dead end. But his old dog, Deputy, who was 13 and moved with the memory of old wounds, was pulling hard to the left. Cole learned years ago that it was a waste of breath to argue with that dog's gut. He smelled the busted wagon before he saw it, the sharp scent of splintered pine. Then his horse dug in its heels, ears pinned back. Down the slope, a woman was on her knees in the snow, her arms locked around 2 small children. She was not looking down. She was staring up at the ridge, watching those lanterns sweep back and forth. Cole sized up the situation in a heartbeat. 3 lanterns moving in a sweep, not a search. They were not looking for her. They were closing in on her. She knew it too. She was staying put, hoping the snow would cover their tracks before the light found them. He could have just kept riding north to check on that fence line. Nobody had seen him yet. But Deputy let out a low noise deep in his chest. It was the sound he made when he had already made up his mind and was just waiting for Cole to catch up. That is when the little girl turned her head and looked straight at Cole through the falling snow. She was not crying. She just watched him with the steady eyes of a child who knows something bad is happening and has decided to see it through. That settled it. Cole swung down from his horse. "Ma'am," he kept his voice lower than the wind. "Do not move. I am coming down slow." Her head snapped toward him, her shoulders rigid with a pain she refused to acknowledge. "How many?" she asked. It was not a question. It was a demand for information. "3 on the ridge. Could be more I have not spotted. There are 2 more south," she stated. "They are trying to cut off the road by the creek." She had already mapped their whole plan in the dark, in a blizzard, with a dislocated shoulder and 2 children to worry about. He tucked that piece of information away. "My ranch is 1.5 miles west of here. There is a gully they cannot see from up there," he said, getting down to her level, "but we have to move in the next 4 minutes, or they will clear the bend and spot us." She looked him over. Her face was pale, with a frozen cut over one eye. She was reading him, looking for the catch. "You live here? Alone?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then why are you stopping?" It was the right question. The same one he had just asked himself. "Because if I do not," he said, "and I hear what happened to you and yours tomorrow, I will not sleep right for the rest of my life." He glanced at her shoulder, the way her arm hung all wrong. That shoulder needs setting and not out here in the cold. She held his gaze for a second more, then looked at her boy. "James," she said softly, "take your sister's hand." The boy, who was maybe 8 or 9, gave Cole one long, measuring look, and then took his sister's hand without a word. They slipped through the gully in silence, with Cole leading his horse to block the view from the ridge. He offered the woman his arm twice, and she refused it twice. The third time, when the path turned to steep ice and she stumbled, she grabbed his sleeve on her own and let go the second she was steady. She let go fast, like someone who had practiced not holding on. The little girl, who was maybe 5 or 6, looked up at his horse. "What is her name?" "Pepper." "That is a good name," she said with great seriousness. "Deputy is a good name, too." She nodded toward the old dog limping ahead of them. "How did you know his name?" "He just looks like a deputy," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Cole's ranch house was dark and cold, but the walls were solid and the stove lit up quick. Within 20 minutes, he had a fire roaring. He pulled out some blankets his mother had sent him 2 years back, blankets he had never had a reason to use until now. The little girl, Clara, was fast asleep before the first blanket even settled over her. Her brother, James, sat beside her, straight-backed and watchful. His eyes followed Cole everywhere. He was a boy who had been the man of the house for way too long. The woman sat at the table, a leather bag in her lap that she had not set down once. She would have taken a fall before letting go of that bag. Cole put a tin cup of hot water in front of her. "I am all out of coffee," he said. "I have had worse." She wrapped her hands around the warm cup and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then they opened and she was all there again. "Your shoulder needs to go back in," he told her. "It is going to hurt. I know that too. Do you want me to warn you or just do it?" Something shifted in her face then. Not relief, but the quiet surprise of someone who had not been given a choice in a very long time. "Just do it," she said. He set her arm, found the right angle, and popped it back into place with one clean movement. She made one sharp sound, a bitten-off breath that she swallowed right down. And just like that, she went still. Cole saw the boy, James, keep his eyes fixed hard on his sister, never flinching. The boy heard it, but chose to watch over Clara. And that told Cole a whole story about how many times this child had seen ugly things and learned to look away. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady as a rock. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Eleanor McBride." She tested the fingers on her reset arm. "My husband was Thomas McBride. He handled the books for Peton Mining. He is dead." Cole sat across from her while the fire crackled. "It was 8 months ago in the number 3 shaft. Her voice was flat and dangerous. They called it an accident. That company is mighty good at filing accidents." Cole stayed quiet. "So where are you headed?" "There is a federal land office in Billings," she said, "and a judge there, Alderman Price, who my husband was told is one of the few men Peton does not own." She glanced at her bag. "I have Thomas's notebook. It has every record, every name, every crooked payment Peton has made for 4 years, including the Colville collapse." That name hit Cole like a punch to the gut. "What do you know about Colville?" he asked. "I know 7 men died, and the official report found nobody to blame." She reached into her bag and laid a folded piece of newspaper on the table. "I know a Pinkerton detective, a man named Cole Hargrove, wrote the first report and named Peton as the cause. I know that report vanished and Hargrove quit his job rather than sign the doctored one." She wasn't looking at the paper. She was looking right at him. "My husband believed you told the truth. He kept a copy of your real report. He made sure to remember your name." Cole didn't reach for the clipping. "How long have you known who I am?" he asked her. "Since you told me your name up on that ridge. I knew it right away. Thomas made me memorize the names of everyone involved, just in case something bad happened to him." She paused for a moment. "He was a careful man. He had to be. Men like Peton do not leave loose ends." "No, ma'am, they sure don't." She put her hand flat on the table. Her knuckles were scraped up from the wreck. "They left my Thomas in that shaft and called him careless. They have been chasing me for 4 days because I took this notebook instead of just sitting home to cry." Her jaw was set tight. "Well, I am not grieving quietly." Cole looked at her, at the faint ink stains on her fingers from so many long nights of writing. He saw how she sat with a clear path to the door, never letting the window out of her sight. She had a way of touching that leather bag, like a person touches something they have sworn to protect. "There is a federal marshal named Garrett," he said. "He is too stubborn and too mean for any man to buy. I know how to get a message to him." Eleanor just stared. "Why would you do that for us?" It was the same question she had asked before, not with suspicion, but with real curiosity. She was a woman who had learned the hard way not to expect kindness. Cole looked at his own name in the faded newspaper print. He remembered his boss handing him the fake report, telling him to just sign it. He had not felt angry, just tired, bone-tired of it all. He had walked out that day, telling himself that was enough. For 2 years he had been lying to himself. "Your husband kept 7 names in that book of his," Cole said. "The men from Coleville. I put those names in my first report, but someone took them out. They were not in any official record or newspaper." He met her eyes. He met her. "How did Thomas find them?" Eleanor was quiet for a second. "He went to the families," she said softly. "He spent 3 whole months finding every single family of the men who died. He wrote down everything they told him." She paused. "He said somebody should have done it a long time ago." Cole sat there for a good while. Outside, the blizzard was howling, pressing in on the little cabin. But the fire inside was holding steady. The dog, Deputy, had moved to the foot of Clara's bed, on guard duty. "You need some sleep," Cole finally told her. "I have got to get to Billings. The pass has been snowed in since Sunday. You are not going anywhere for at least 3 days, maybe 5. He stood up. "You need to rest. Your children need their rest. In the morning you need a hot meal. Then you will tell me every single thing that is in that notebook. So when we do make a move, we do it smart." She looked at his face, searching it, looking for the trick, for the real reason behind his words. She did not find one. "There's a bolt on the top of that door," he told her, "and a latch on the bottom. You slide them both, and nobody can get in without waking the whole cabin." She looked at the door and then back to him. "You are sleeping in the barn? Me and Deputy will be out there. The horses will not mind the company." He saw something change in her eyes. It was the look of a woman who had been pushed around and controlled for months, and was just now being handed something as simple as a choice. "Cole," she said, using his first name for the first time. He did not make a fuss about it. "If Piton's men find this place, it will not be tonight. The storm is too heavy. They will hunker down and try again in the morning." He picked up his rifle. "That means tonight you are safe. Get some sleep while you can." He put on his coat and walked to the door. Behind him, James McBride spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "Mister." Cole stopped. The boy was still sitting right there beside his sister, his back straight as a board. His eyes were dark and serious, looking far too old for his years. "You are going to stand watch, are not you?" James said. "Yes, son, I am." The boy nodded slowly, looking first at his mother, then back to Cole. "My father used to stand watch," he said, "when he found something worth protecting." Cole did not say a word. He just opened the door, and the blizzard roared in for a second, cold and sharp. Then he was gone, and the door was shut. He heard the lock slide into place, top and bottom, just like he told her. He stood there on the porch in the blowing snow and just breathed. Inside that cabin, Eleanor McBride was sitting with her husband's notebook held tight to her chest, with her 2 children sleeping behind her. She was alive because a 13-year-old dog decided to pull on his leash. Cole stared out into the white wall of the storm and thought about 7 names that were erased from a report. He thought about Thomas McBride, a bookkeeper who spent 3 months finding the families of those men. He thought about how a man can walk away from a fight and lie to himself for 2 years that it was enough. He tightened his grip on the rifle and took his post at the corner of the porch. He stood watch, the way a man does when he has found something worth protecting. The snow was coming down hard, like it was trying to bury everything that had ever gone wrong. But Cole knew better than most that it does not work like that. Under all that clean, quiet snow, the truth was still there, right where it had been left. And come morning, a woman who refused to grieve quietly was going to help him dig it all back up. He made it until 2 in the morning before the cold finally drove him back inside. It was not just the temperature, it was the kind of deep cold that gets in your bones and makes a man's hands slow on a rifle. He stomped the snow off his boots and eased the door open, expecting to find the cabin dark. But Eleanor was at the table, a lantern turned down low with the notebook open and a pencil flying across the page. She did not even look up. "I told you to get some sleep," he said. "I am making a copy," she answered, "in case they get the original. 2 copies are harder to make disappear than just one." Cole stood there and watched her. Her handwriting was small and neat, the kind a school teacher has, clear and easy to read. She was writing down names, a long column of them with numbers right beside each one. He took off his coat and sat at the other end of the table. She just kept on writing. "Thomas teach you that?" he asked. "Make copies." "Thomas taught me a lot of things." The pencil stopped for just a second, then started right back up. "He said the most dangerous thing in the world is the only copy of a document. He said powerful men do not destroy the evidence. They destroy the people who have it. It is cleaner that way." She turned a page. "So, I am making sure more than one person has it." Cole watched her write. The fire was down to glowing coals, and the cabin was filled with the quiet sounds of 2 in the morning, the soft breathing of the children and the dog. "How long have you been a teacher?" he asked after a while. She looked up from some paper she was writing on. "Since I was 19. How long have you been asking questions you already know the answers to?" "It is an old habit." "You are not a detective anymore," she observed. "No, ma'am. Then you can just ask what you want to know." Cole leaned back in his chair. "The men on the ridge," he said. "You recognize their formation. That is not something a person just figures out in a blizzard by accident. How long have they been following you?" Her pencil stopped moving. When she finally looked up, her expression was clear. She was deciding to tell him the whole truth. "Since St. Louis," she said. "It started the week after my husband Thomas died. I went to his office and found a notebook he had hidden for me. It was tucked inside an old ledger." She folded her hands over the notebook on the table. They had been through the fire for this book, and Cole had a feeling the fire was not out yet. "Thomas always told me, if anyone ever turns this place upside down, check the sugar tin, the lining of my winter coat, and behind the third baseboard over in the study." I found 3 different sets of papers he had been stashing for months. Cole was quiet for a spell. He knew they were coming for him, he just did not know when. Her voice got a little deeper, heavier with the weight of it all. "He left me a letter too, tucked inside the coat. He told me exactly where to go, who I could trust, and how to move without leaving a trail. He told me to take the children and just keep going. He wrote it so calmly, like he had all the time in the world. He knew he was going to die, and he spent his last few hours writing me a way out." Cole spoke into the quiet. "He sure loved you." She shook her head. "He was a practical man." But the way she said it, Cole knew she understood that Thomas McBride had been both. Eleanor slid the notebook open. "The names on the left," she said, "are the men Patton paid to sign off on the Coville mine shaft, saying it was sound just 6 weeks before it caved in. The right column shows how much they got." Thomas noted every last detail. Cole's eyes stopped on one name. Harlan Driscoll, the county sheriff for the Copper Falls district. "You know him?" she asked. "He is the sheriff for this county." Cole leaned back, remembering. "He stopped by a couple of months ago over a fence dispute. I spoke with him for 20 minutes. He looked at the number next to Driscoll's name. $400 paid in 2 parts way back in 1876. 8 months before the collapse," she said. "Patton was buying his protection before the first corner was even cut." Cole could see the whole rotten picture now. This was not just a company cutting corners. It was a web of corruption, planned from the start. He changed the subject sharply. "Your shoulder. What about it?" "That fall from the wagon," he started, then hesitated. He had to ask, "Are you sure the baby is all right?" Eleanor went still. For the first time, he saw the woman behind the iron will, the part of her that was scared. "I do not know," she said, and the words cost her dearly. "You have felt movement?" "Yes," she answered. "Not as much, but yes." He kept his voice steady. Then it is most likely fine. The cold slows everything down. But if that changes, you tell me. She picked her pencil back up. I am not stubborn about things that matter. He almost smiled. You are plenty stubborn about the right things. Thomas used to say I had the stubbornness of a woman who had been told no her whole life. He was a smart man, Cole said. Smarter than me about people, she added. He could size a man up in 5 minutes. She paused, and the silence in the room shifted. He would have trusted you. Cole looked at her. How do you know that? Because he kept your name. Her gaze was direct and clear. Thomas McBride did not waste space on men he did not believe in. Your name was on the second page, right after the 7 men from the mine. He put you with the victims, Cole, not with the witnesses. Outside, the blizzard howled on, settling in for the long haul, the kind of storm that tries to wear you down instead of break you. But Cole was not the kind to give up a fight. I need to tell you something about Coville, he said. When I wrote my first report, I had everything. Photographs of the shoddy shaft supports, statements from 3 miners who survived. I had enough proof to shut Piton down for good, but my supervisor at the agency told me to stand down. He said it was being handled higher up. 3 weeks later, he handed me a new report to sign. It was a clean bill of health for the mine, calling all my proof inconclusive. My job depended on my signature. And you walked out, she guessed. I walked out, he said, his voice flat. I told myself it was the honorable thing to do, that my conscience was clean. But I took my files with me, locked them in a chest, and hid myself out here in Montana. I told myself walking away was enough. His words were heavy with 2 years of regret. It was not enough, he finished. 7 men were still gone, and Piton was still in business. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. Where are the files, she asked. The photographs, the testimony, all of it. Where are they? In a cedar chest, under my bed. A new light came into Eleanor McBride's eyes. It was not triumph, but the look of someone who has carried an impossible load alone and just found help. Cole, she said, her voice tight with emotion. Your files and Thomas's notebook together. It is enough to hang him. Yes, Cole said. I know. The lantern burned between them, a small, steady flame. Just then a small voice came from the shadows. How long have you been awake? Cole asked. A while, James said, sitting up. The boy's voice was careful, like a man who measures his words. I heard what you said about the mine. Eleanor said his name softly, like a warning. He needs to know, James told his mother. He is helping us. He should know everything. The boy looked at Cole. Those men who are following us, are they going to come here? Not in this storm, Cole answered. Maybe in the morning. And the sheriff? The one in the book? He is the law here, his mother confirmed. So we cannot go to him, James stated. No. The boy thought for a moment. But you know other people, right? People Piton does not own? I know one man, Cole said. A federal marshal named Garrett. He is 3 days east of here in good weather. I can send a wire from Copper Falls, provided Driscoll has not gotten to the telegraph man first. Cole looked at Eleanor. That is our first move. At first light, I ride for town. Back before Piton's men could circle back. That leaves us by our lonesome, James said. Eleanor started to hush him, but the boy wasn't complaining. He was assessing the situation. He stared at Cole with those serious, dark eyes. What are we supposed to do if someone shows up while you are gone? Cole leaned in close, looked that boy right in the eye in the middle of a Montana blizzard, and gave him the straight truth. There is a rifle under the bed, he said. It is loaded. Your mother knows how to use it. He glanced over at Eleanor, who gave a single, firm nod. If anyone knocks on that door, you do not answer it. You take your sister to the back wall and you let your mother handle things. Your only job is to watch out for your sister. Do you understand me? James held his gaze for a long count, then nodded. Go on back to sleep, Eleanor said softly. The boy laid down and put his arm right back over his little sister, a gesture both practiced and protective. Within minutes, his breathing was deep and even, like a soldier who had learned to catch sleep whenever he could. Eleanor watched her son for a good while, her face showing a mix of pride and heartbreak. It was the look of a mother who had seen her child grow up too fast under the worst kind of pressure. Cole saw it, and he did not look away. "He is 8 years old," she whispered. "He was only 6 when the trouble started at the mine. For 2 years, he has watched me be afraid, and not once has he ever let me see him scared." "Oh, he is scared," Cole said. "He has just decided it is not a useful feeling." "That is what I mean," she said, looking down at the notebook. "A boy his age should not have to make that kind of decision." Cole did not argue. She was right. He got up and went to his mother's old cedar chest. Some habits from his Pinkerton years never quite left a man. He knelt and lifted a false bottom he had built long ago. Inside was an oilskin envelope tied with twine. He set the whole thing on the table. Eleanor looked from the package to him. "Are you sure about this?" "I have been sure for 2 years," he told her. "I just had not decided to do anything about it." She untied the twine and pulled out the first photograph. She studied the picture of the mine shaft supports, seeing where the bracing had been cut away to save a little money. She took it all in, sharp and quick, before she started reading the testimony pages. For the better part of an hour, she read without a single word. Cole added wood to the fire and set a hot cup of water by her elbow, which she drank without ever looking up. Outside, the dark began to soften from black to the deep gray that comes before a winter dawn. When she finished the last page, she laid her hands flat on the table. "The foreman who ordered the bracing removed," she said. "His name was Marcus Hull." "Yes," Cole said. "He is in Thomas's notebook. He is still on Peaton's payroll. He is running the new site north of Billings." She pressed her palms down harder. "He gave an order that killed 7 men, and now he is in charge of 300 more. I know." She finally looked up at Cole. "This has to stop." "I mean all of it," she said. "Not just Peaton in a courtroom. I mean Hull, Driscoll, every last name on that list. That is what the federal courts are for," Cole said. "That is why we need to get a hold of Garrett." She was quiet for a moment. "Cole, what if Garrett has been bought off too?" It was the right question to ask, the one you ask when you have lived under a corrupt system for too long. "He might be," Cole said honestly. "But I've watched that man for 12 years, and I've never seen him take a crooked dollar. Some men are not for sale, not because they are saints, but because they are too angry." Garrett's brother died in a mine collapse back in Pennsylvania, and he has been mad about it since 1869. Peaton does not have enough money to buy that kind of anger. Eleanor looked at him, and you could see her mind settle. It was the calm of a person who has made a choice and is done looking back. "Send the wire at first light," she said, and went back to her work. Cole watched over the room, the sleeping children and the steady fire. 2 people who had each been holding half of a broken story for 2 years were finally putting it back together. He did not feel the need to sleep. Something inside him that had been rusted shut for years was finally starting to move again. It was not a comfortable feeling, but it was working. As the first hint of gray touched the sky, he reached for his coat. "I will be back in a couple of hours," he said. Eleanor nodded without looking up. Then she said, "Cole, the telegraph man in Copper Falls is named Everyt Kane. He is an old man with a daughter in Billings. Peaton's foreman ran her husband out of a job for complaining about the mine." She met his eyes. "Peaton does not own him. Tell him Eleanor McBride sent you. He will understand." "It was Thomas," he said. "Thomas," she confirmed. "He knew everybody." Cole put on his coat and grabbed the rifle. He looked one last time at the table, at Eleanor bent over her work, 8 months along with 2 sleeping children behind her. Her dead husband's fight was laid out before her like a map, and she was fixing to follow it all the way to the end. He opened the door to a blast of cold air. "Do not let Driscoll see you," Eleanor said, her pencil never stopping. "No, ma'am." He stepped out and pulled the door shut. hearing both bolts slide into place. He stood for a moment in the pale light. The snow was deep and clean, covering a world that was anything but. He thought about a foreman named Hall and a sheriff named Driscoll. He thought about a man in Billings who had been buying off safety inspectors since 1875. And he thought of Thomas McBride, writing notes to his wife by lamplight, knowing his time was running out. He saddled his horse, Pepper, and rode toward Copper Falls. The whole world looked quiet and clean, but it was all a lie. Everett Kane was already at his desk when Cole walked in. That meant word had already gotten around town, not by wire, but by whispers between folks who knew how to watch without being seen. The old man looked up, a coffee cup in his hand. He had the face of a man expecting company he was not entirely happy to see. Cole shut the door, dripping melted snow on the floor. "Eleanor McBride sent me," he said. Everett Kane set his cup down slow. It was not surprise on his face, but recognition. It was the look of a man who had been waiting for a knock on a door he had held open in his mind for a long, long time. "Sit down," Kane said, "and keep your voice down. Driscoll's deputy sleeps right across the street, and that one's got big ears." Cole sat and laid out the whole story, quiet and plain. He told him about the woman, the children, the notebook, and the files. He explained the wire had to get to Marshal Garrett in Billings before Peaton's crew figured out where Eleanor had gone. Kane listened without a word, the way a good telegraph operator does, taking it all in. When Cole finished, Kane picked up his pencil. "Garrett is not in Billings," he said. Cole froze. "He passed through here. 4 days ago, Garrett was heading north when a storm trapped him at Ridgeline Station." Kane wrote while he spoke, explaining he got a wire from the operator just yesterday. "Garrett is pinned down like everyone else." Kane looked up. "But he is only 2 hours north, not 3 days east. And he has been itching for a reason to move. I might have mentioned to that operator about some unusual business out in the Copper Falls district, something the Federals might want to look into." Cole stared at him. "You already knew about Eleanor?" Kane nodded. "I knew a woman was being hunted on the East Ridge Road 2 days ago. My own granddaughter saw the lanterns from her window." He kept on writing. "I was just waiting for someone I knew to walk through that door." He tore the message from the pad. "This gets to Garrett in the next 5 minutes. If he leaves at first light, he can be here before noon." "But what about Driscoll?" "Driscoll does not see my real transmissions." Kane's voice was flat, certain. "He thinks he does. For 8 months, I have sent him a copy of my log. It is accurate, except for the parts that truly matter." He met Cole's gaze. "My daughter's husband was a good man who asked one too many questions about mine's safety. Some of us do not have the choice to just ride off to Montana, Mr. Hargrove." Cole took the words without flinching. It was the truth, and Kane had earned the right to say it. "Send the wire," Cole said. Kane did. Cole made it back to the ranch in less than an hour, before the snow on the road was disturbed. He put Pepper in the barn and gave the signal at the door. 2 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. The bolt slid back and Eleanor opened it, a rifle held loosely at her side. Her eyes asked the question for her. "Garrett is 2 hours north," Cole told her. "He is stuck at Ridgeline. Kane sent him a wire. He ought to be here by noon." A flicker of something crossed Eleanor's face. Then it was gone. Kane knew. He was waiting for a call. She stepped aside, letting him in. The cabin was different. The files and notebook were gone from the clean table. James and the dog deputy stood at the window, both staring south with a quiet focus. Clara was awake on the blankets, chewing a dry biscuit she had found. She seemed to be guarding it. "There is a man at the south tree line," James said, his eyes still fixed outside. "He has been there about 20 minutes, just standing." Cole went to the window and saw the boy was right. A lone figure stood 200 yards out, not moving forward or back. It was a standoff, plain and simple. A good woman against a powerful man, and we were caught right in the middle. This is a story about how doing the right thing ain't ever the easy thing. But it is always worth it. Cole saw one rider. "Just one I can see," young James said, his voice steady. Cole gave the boy a hard look. That was a smart answer. Eleanor watched them, her face like stone. "They are waiting for Driscoll," she said. Cole knew it too. "They will be here before Garrett arrives. We need to get ready." He looked at James. "Back wall with your sister." Eleanor spoke softly. "James, take Clara to the back room now." The boy understood. He took his sister's hand and led her away, closing the door behind him. Eleanor faced Cole. "How many men does Piton have?" "I know of 6, Cole said, checking his rifle. "But Piton is not a man who gets his own hands dirty. He sends paper, then he sends men." Eleanor shook her head. "The paper will not work." "That notebook was Thomas's private property." "He does not need it to be legal," Cole replied. "He just needs it done before Garrett gets here." They both knew what that meant. Outside, the lone figure stayed put. Deputy, the dog, stood by the door, coiled up tight like a spring. He was not resting. He was ready. Cole had seen that look before and trusted it completely. He turned to Eleanor. "How is your shoulder this morning?" "I can manage," she said. "The baby is moving more." A wave of relief washed over Cole, and he filed that feeling away for later. "There is something I did not tell you," Eleanor said quietly. "When Thomas sent me the letter, he included another name. Not a person to find, but one to avoid." She paused, her eyes on the door. "But he also wrote that if I made it to the Montana Territory, one man's help would be worth more than anyone else's. A man with the proof and the reason to make sure the world could not ignore what happened at Coleville." She paused. "He wrote your name." Cole stood there, quiet. "He wrote it with a specific message," she continued. "He said, 'Find Cole Hargrove. And when you do, tell him Thomas McBride said the men of Cleville are still waiting for their names to be put in a report that stays written.'" A log shifted in the fire. At the window, Cole saw that the lone figure had been joined by another. They still were not advancing, but they had spread out, using the trees for cover. "They're positioning," he said quietly. Eleanor was at his side in an instant. She saw it too. "How long?" "Maybe 10 minutes, he answered. He turned to her. "The files, where are they?" "Same place you had them." She moved to a cedar chest and lifted a false bottom, revealing his oilskin envelope next to her notebook and papers. She put the board back. "They will not find it in a quick search." "It is not a quick search I am worried about," he said, picking up his rifle. "Eleanor." He waited for her to turn. "I need you to do something that will feel all wrong." She crossed her arms, listening but not agreeing yet. "When they get here, and they are coming, I need you to let me answer the door. Do not stand behind it. Do not hold the rifle. Let me—" "You guard the front. Trust me to hold this line till Garrett arrives. Even if he is late, I will hold it." She stared him down. "With what?" "You are a rancher, not the law." He met her gaze. "I have the original Coleville papers, a witness, and your husband's notebook locked in that cedar chest. The second Marshal Garrett walks in, this whole place becomes a federal case, and anyone in our way becomes his problem." He let that sink in. "That is, if we are still standing." Eleanor did not hesitate long. "All right." She turned to the back room. "James." The boy appeared at once. She knelt to look him square in the eye. "Now you listen to me. Those men outside, the ones who hurt your pa, they are after what is in that chest. Mr. Cole will not let them have it. You need to stay in there with your sister and keep her calm. You trust me." The boy looked from his mother to Cole. "The marshal is coming," Cole said. 2 hours, give or take. We just have to run out the clock." You could see the boy, all of 8 years old, doing math no child should ever have to do. Then he stood up straight, just like his mother does when she sets her jaw. and gave a firm nod. "Do not you let them in," he said. "No, sir," Cole replied. James shut the door. They did not have to wait. A hard official knock came 12 minutes later. Cole was already there. Eleanor was at the table, hands clear, her rifle propped against the wall. Cole opened the door to Sheriff Harlan Driscoll and his men. The sheriff wore the look of a man on a dirty errand, his eyes hollowed out from a bad bargain. He said nothing, just stood in the doorway. "Morning, Cole," Driscoll finally said, his voice forced. "I have a warrant from Judge Alderman himself. It is for a woman, Eleanor McBride, wanted for theft of documents from the Peton Mining Company." He held out the paper. Cole ignored it. "Seen anybody on the road?" Driscoll asked. "A pregnant woman with 2 kids? The road has been snowed in for 2 days, Harlan," Cole said flatly. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "I have to look inside. Is there a search warrant with that paper?" Cole asked. Driscoll hesitated just a second too long. "A retrieval warrant is for a person," Cole stated calmly. "It does not give you the right to search my home. For that, you need a different warrant from a different judge, and the closest one who is not in Alderman's pocket is 3 days from here. You have been the law long enough to know that." In the sheriff's eyes, Cole saw a man forced to choose his path. "Cole," Driscoll said, all the pretense gone. "Do not make this difficult." "I am not making it anything," Cole replied. "I am standing in my own doorway. The question is what you're about to do." One of Driscoll's men, young and itching for a fight, stepped forward. "Sheriff, this warrant says get back," Driscoll ordered. The man fell back. Driscoll's expression was haunted. "I have got a little girl," he said so quiet the wind almost took the words. "Peton owns my house." "I know," Cole said softly. He had seen the $400 payment in the ledger right next to the month the sheriff's daughter was sick. "I know how they got to you, Harlan." Pain flickered in the sheriff's eyes. "A federal marshal is on his way," Cole pressed. "Less than 2 hours out. What you choose to do now is going to count for a whole lot more than the last 2 years. Your name is in that notebook. A federal court will treat a sheriff who respected the law very differently than one who kicked down a door." The wind howled between them. The younger deputy reached for his gun. He was stopped not by Cole's rifle, but by the other deputy. The old dog, silent until now, stepped to Cole's side and let out a low growl that stopped the deputy cold. "Don't," Driscoll said quietly to his man. The decision he'd avoided for 2 years was finally made. He folded the warrant, tucked it away, and gave Cole a look that was hard to read. 2 hours, he said. Cole confirmed it. Driscoll and his men left. Only when they were gone down the road did Cole breathe. Eleanor was right behind him, holding the rifle. "I heard," she said. Cole nodded. "That's how Peton works. He finds your weakness, offers help, and then he owns you. A man can't prove he's clean after that." Thomas wrote that he called it an architecture of debt. Eleanor said the only way to tear it down is to make staying inside hurt more than leaving. "That's what just happened," Cole said. But she worried Driscoll could still wire Peton. Cole shook his head. "He had the men to search this house and did not. That tells me which way he is leaning." The back room door opened and the children came out. "They left?" James asked. Clara, still eating a biscuit, looked from her mother to Cole. "Deputy was very loud," she said, mighty pleased. "He was," Cole agreed. The little girl sat right down beside the old dog, claiming him as her own. Eleanor put a hand on James's shoulder and the boy leaned into her touch, finally letting his guard down. Those next 2 hours felt longer than the first winter Cole spent in that cabin alone. He fed the horses and walked the property line twice. When he came back, Eleanor was just sitting at the table, her hands around a cup, staring into nothing. "What will you do after?" he asked her. "After all this is over?" She looked down at her hands, at the faint ink stains and the callus from her pencil. "I want to teach," she said, her voice clear and certain. "I want to find a place with children who need a teacher. I want Clara to grow up able to read any contract put in front of her. And I want James to know there are good systems in this world because good people made them that way. That's a lot of wanting, Cole said softly. I have been saving it up, she replied simply. He looked at the woman who had faced a blizzard, copied evidence all night, and stared down a sheriff without flinching. I think Thomas McBride would have liked knowing you ended up somewhere with a good school. Her chin trembled just a bit. He would have liked knowing I was not running anymore, she said. Just then they heard hooves from the north. It was a steady, purposeful sound. Lawmen. Cole was at the window in a heartbeat. 4 riders. A badge flashed in the sun. The dog stood up. Clara looked to the door. Is that the good man? She asked. Eleanor crossed to the window, and a look of enormous relief washed over her, the kind you see when someone finally stops just surviving and starts to breathe. Yes, baby, she said. That is the good man. Cole opened the door. Marshal Thomas Garrett rode into the yard with 3 deputies. He looked like a man who'd been waiting for this call and rode hard the second it came. He acknowledged Cole, but his eyes were on Eleanor. Mrs. McBride, he said. She stood tall. Marshal, I have the documentation pertaining to Peton mining. She listed it all. Her husband's notebook, 2 complete copies, and Cole's original investigative files. 73 pages in all. Garrett looked at Cole. The original files? He asked. In the cedar chest, intact, Cole said. The marshal dismounted. He was a solid man with tired eyes that saw everything, and a stillness that came from turning a long anger into something useful. Then I reckon, he said, stepping onto the porch, we have some work to do. Cole stepped aside and let the lawman in. Outside, a false silence lay over the snow. Inside, the names of 7 men from Coleville rested in an envelope beside the testimony of a woman who would not grieve quietly. The work of justice was about to begin. Garrett was all business, methodical and thorough. He sat at the table and read every single page. He read the notebook, the old files, and the copies Eleanor had made. He made his own notes with a small pencil but asked no questions. Cole put on a pot of real coffee, brought by a deputy who understood what a long ride required. Clara appointed herself the hostess, very seriously handing cups to men 3 times her size. Model, her part, and she aimed to do it right. James sat at the far end of the table, a world away from Garrett, and just watched the lawman read. He was still as a stone, watching with that deep, patient focus of his. After a good long while, Garrett finally looked up from a page, straight at James, and asked, Your daddy wrote this? Yes, sir, James answered. He was a bookkeeper. Yes, sir. Garrett glanced back down. He wrote like a courthouse lawyer, he muttered. It was not praise, and it was not a complaint. It was just one professional spotting another one's craft. Your father saw every argument coming before it was even made. He wrote down what happened and then proved why his account was the solid truth. He turned a page. Most folks just tell me what they saw. Your daddy told me what he saw, how he saw it, and why the papers he copied were the real McCoy. There was a short silence. He always knew this was headed for a courtroom, James said, his voice low. Garrett looked at the boy again, and for just a second, something shifted in the lawman's tired eyes. Then he went back to his reading. Eleanor spoke from the window. Those names in the third part, she said. The buyers. 3 of them work in the Billings District Land Office. I've seen their faces. Garrett kept his eyes on the page. Judge Alderman signed Driscoll's warrant this morning. I know. Alderman's been on my list for 14 months. Garrett turned another page. Well, he just shot to the top. Cole poured himself some coffee and leaned on the wall by the door, letting the marshal do his work. The youngest deputy, a red-headed fella named Fitch, who couldn't have been more than 22, had already posted himself on the porch without a word. The other 2 were with the horses. Nobody mentioned Peton's men still hiding in the trees, but everyone knew they were out there, and time was ticking for all of them. The only question was, whose time would run out first? Mr. Hargrove. Garrett set down the last page and squared the stack up, real deliberate. He looked at Cole. Tell me about the night you wrote that first Claville report. Cole came and sat at the table. He told the story straight, just like he told Eleanor, with no frills and no making himself out to be a hero. He talked about the proof he'd gathered and what the miners told him. Then he talked about the night his boss handed him a scrubbed-clean version and ordered him to sign it. Garrett listened the way he read, with his full attention, just making a note now and then. When Cole was done, Garrett asked, "This supervisor?" "Harlan Beaumont from the Chicago office." "He's dead, been dead 18 months. Garrett said it like he was talking about the weather. "Carriage wreck up in Illinois." After a moment, he added, "Peaton's got a man in Chicago. His whole job is making sure folks who know too much have convenient little accidents. We've been working that angle for a while." He looked square at Cole. "Your original report ties the Chicago business to what's happening here in Montana. That's a federal conspiracy charge. It stomps all over any local lawman Peaton's got in his pocket." The cabin was dead quiet. "You've been building a case," Eleanor said from the window, just stating a fact. "For 16 months," Garrett confirmed. "I had bits and pieces. Crooked inspectors, a string of accidents that didn't look like accidents anymore." He looked right at her. "What I was missing was the map. Something that showed how it all connected, the whole rotten system." He tapped Thomas's notebook. "Your husband, ma'am. He drew me the map." Eleanor's hands were tight at her sides. "He died for it." "Yes, ma'am, he surely did." Garrett didn't sugarcoat it, because he could tell she wasn't the kind of woman who wanted it softened. And what he built is going to tear that whole thing down from the bottom to the very top. He let that sink in. "But you need to know what's coming next." "Tell me." "I'm going to arrest Augustus Peaton. I've got enough to do it today, right now. And I plan on doing it before he gets wind we're all here." He glanced at the stack of papers. "But Peaton has lawyers everywhere and a judge in his pocket. The second I bring him in, they'll do everything they can to tear this evidence apart, and you along with it." He held her gaze. "That means you, Mrs. McBride. They'll come after your good name, your past, your marriage. They'll say your husband made it all up. They'll say you faked these copies. They will find every weak spot you've ever had and push on it in front of everyone." Eleanor walked to the table and sat down. She put her hands flat on the wood like a woman getting her bearings. "I was a school teacher for 9 years," she said. "I have good words from 3 schools and a 17-year reputation for being exact. Any court can check that." She met Garrett's eyes. "I am 8 months pregnant with my 3rd child. I have been on the run for 4 days, and I spent last night copying 73 pages of evidence by a lantern. I reckon folks will see I'm committed to the truth." She paused. "What else?" A small, rare smile touched Garrett's lips. "I'll need you in Billings for the federal hearing. It'll take 3, maybe 4 weeks. You'll testify about Thomas's work and the copies you made." He turned to Cole. "I'll need you to talk about the real Colville report, and the night your boss tried to make you sign the fake one." "When are you going after Peaton?" Cole asked. "This afternoon. I want to be in his main office before closing time, long before his boys in the woods can warn him." Garrett stood up. "I'm leaving Fitch and Deputy Reyes here with you. Nobody's getting near this cabin with 2 federal badges on the porch." Cole nodded. Clara, the little girl, had been taking all this in. She looked up at the big lawman. "Are you going to put the bad man in jail?" she asked. Garrett looked down at her, a bit uncertain, like a man who wasn't around children much. "Yes, miss," he said, doing his best. "Good," Clara said, like the matter was settled for good, and turned her attention back to the deputy. Garrett gathered the papers carefully, keeping the originals separate from the copies. From the copies, with each stack wrapped tight in oilskin. He slid them inside his coat with the sure movement of a man who'd carried important papers for 12 years and knew the safest place was right next to the heart. He was nearly out the door when Eleanor spoke his name. "Marshall." He paused. She said, "There is a man named Marcus Holcomb. He runs Peaton's operation north of Billings. He was the one who ordered the bracing pulled at Claville." Her voice was steady and plain, the way it always was when words cost her something. The man is still working. He is still giving orders. 300 men were in that mine. Garrett turned back. He is in the notebook. Page 14. It shows payments from Piton to Holcomb 6 weeks before the collapse, labeled compensation for operational adjustments. Eleanor met the marshal's gaze. Thomas was certain that was Piton's code for cutting corners on safety. Cole added, it was. 3 miners who survived said the very same thing. They were told they were making operational adjustments. Garrett pulled out his own small notebook, writing for about 15 seconds. He looked up. I will have a deputy at the north shaft before sunrise. A moment passed. Thank you, Mrs. McBride. Thank Thomas, she replied. Garrett put on his hat and stepped outside. We heard him give quiet orders to his men, and then the sound of horses heading south, riding with a purpose. After that, it was just the cabin. Fitch was on the porch. The other 2 deputies stood guard, and a special kind of quiet settled in. It is the silence that follows when something that has been building for a long, long time is finally let loose and cannot be taken back. James looked over at his mother. Is it over? He asked. Eleanor glanced at the door, then back to her son. She was quiet for a bit, the honest quiet of a woman who would not lie to her child for comfort. She chose her words with care. The hardest part is starting to be over, she told him. What comes next is a different kind of hard. James thought on that. He said, yes, you will have to tell everyone in court. Yes. The boy gave a slow nod. He looked to Cole. Will you be there? Cole looked at the boy and his mother, and the sleeping dog the little girl had already claimed as her own. He looked at the table where the notebook had sat for 2 days, like the beating heart of the whole affair. Yes, he said. I will be there, he said. I will. James nodded once, a firm, sure nod just like the first night, and went back to his sister. The afternoon dragged on. Fitch was 22 from Ohio, a polite young fellow who was raised to have manners and intended to keep them, even here in a Montana ranch house right after a blizzard. He offered to lend a hand with the horses, and Cole let him. They worked out in the barn for an hour while Fitch talked. He was not nervous, just steady, the way a young man talks when he's in over his head, and words feel like they are doing some good. He talked about Garrett, about becoming a deputy 6 months ago, and about his older brother, who worked in a mine back in Ohio and got a letter every week. Cole just listened and worked. He thought about how Fitch's brother was a miner, and here was Fitch, all of 22 years old, riding for a lawman trying to make mines safer. The boy probably had not put those 2 things together yet, but he would one day, and it would hit him hard. When they returned to the cabin, Eleanor was at the table again with Thomas's notebook open in front of her. She was not looking at the evidence, but at the back pages, the part Thomas used for his own thoughts. Cole could see from across the room the writing was looser, more personal. He did not ask. She closed the book when they came in, not hiding it, just closing something private. Clara is asleep again, she said. James is reading. She looked at Cole. You have a surveying textbook from 1871 on your shelf. My father's. James found it. He has been reading it for 2 hours and has already asked me 4 questions about land that I could not answer. There was a warmth in her voice, not quite a laugh, but close. He might have a future in that line of work, Cole said. The boy thinks like a lawyer. He thinks like Thomas, she said, without the usual hardness in her voice when she said his name. It sounded like she was talking about someone who was gone, but not truly absent. Cole sat down across from her. The fire had settled into its evening rhythm. Fitch, being the good deputy he was, had taken his post outside again. Somewhere to the south, Garrett was riding toward Augustus Peaton's office with federal papers and a dead man's truth. Can I ask you something? Cole said. Eleanor looked at him. That night in the wagon on the ridge, you had the knife stuck in the floorboard before I even got there. You were using it to pull yourself up. He let that hang in the air. You were not going to stay down. No, she said. What was the plan? She was quiet for a moment. I was going to get the children moving north on foot and draw the men with the lanterns south toward me. I had the rifle. It fell in the snow when the wagon rolled, but I knew where it was. I just needed to get the children far enough away that the men would follow me instead. Her hands were lying flat on the table. I had not worked out the part that came after that. That is not a plan, Cole said softly. That is a sacrifice. It is what was available, she answered, meeting his gaze head on. I had 2 children, a notebook, and men 30 yards away. You work with what you have. You work with what you have, Cole repeated, his voice low. He glanced at the cedar chest. Thomas wrote you a letter telling you exactly how to get through this. You read it. You memorized it. You did every last thing he said. And when the instructions ran out, when you were on that ridge with a wrecked wagon and nowhere to go, you started making your own. Eleanor watched him for a long moment. What else was I going to do? It was a real question, from a woman who had never seen another choice. Nothing, Cole said. There was not anything else to do. He looked right at her. I am not saying it was wrong. I am saying I saw it. And I want you to know that I saw it. Because folks who do things like that, in the dark with no one watching, sometimes forget what they did when the world gets ordinary again. The ordinary world can make an extraordinary act feel small. Eleanor sat perfectly still. It was not small, Cole said. What you did on that ridge, and for the last 4 days. What Thomas did for 2 years before you. None of it was small. Someone needed to say that out loud, before the courthouse makes it official and the lawyers wrap it up in fancy words. He held her gaze. It was extraordinary. You are extraordinary. Thomas McBride knew it when he married you, and he knew it when he wrote you those instructions. He knew it was true, even if he did not live to see you finish it. Eleanor was quiet for a good long while. It was not her usual controlled silence. It was the quiet that comes after a large and honest truth has been spoken, and no other words seemed to fit. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but in a new way. It was the steadiness of someone who has been carrying a heavy weight all alone and has just been allowed to set it down. He used to say, she began, that I was the only person he knew who was more afraid of failing the things that mattered than of the consequences of fighting for them. She looked down at the closed notebook. He said it like it was a compliment. It took me a long time to realize that it was. Cole said nothing. Silence was the best answer. Outside, the sky was turning that deep, dark blue of a Montana winter evening. The first stars were popping out sharp and clear against the snow. Fitch had come inside and was eating cold biscuits in the corner. A young deputy who knew that field work was not about warm meals. James had appeared with the surveying book and was peppering Fitch with questions, like a boy who had found a brand new world and wanted to know everything about it. Clara woke up, looked around the room, seemed satisfied with things, and asked for a biscuit. So Cole made biscuits. It was the most normal hour that Cabin had seen in 3 days, since a woman with a hurt shoulder, a leather satchel, and 2 children had knocked the snow from her boots and walked in. And there was something remarkable in that very normalness, the kind of ordinary that you can only find on the other side of something terrible. The storm has passed. The danger is not gone, but it is manageable. The fire is warm, the children are safe, and the coffee is real. Eleanor sat at the table drinking her coffee. She was not writing or copying or planning. She just sat and watched her children. And every now and then, she would look at Cole with an expression he was just starting to understand. He knew that look on her face because he was feeling it too. Once the children were asleep, Cole sat on the porch in the biting cold. His mind was on Billings, on finally standing in a federal courtroom to tell the honest-to-God truth about Cawville. It was not a question of being ready. It was a matter of necessity. Eleanor had settled that question for him back on the road. The door opened, and she joined him, her body heavy with 8 months of pregnancy. They stood together watching the stars. Their silence spoke volumes, the way it does when folks have been through hell and back together. 3 weeks in Billings, she finally said. 3 weeks, he agreed. He watched as she stared at the sky, working through her thoughts out loud. That was her way. She laid out all the pieces until the picture was clear. The children need a place to settle, she said. A school, something that stays put. Montana is good for schools, Cole replied. Federal land grants have been building them since '72. She gave him a sideways glance. You have been looking into it. I read, was all he said. She looked back at the stars. Copper Falls has a school, or it did. It closed last spring. The building is still there. He let that hang in the air for a moment. Town has been trying to find a teacher for 8 months. The silence that followed had a weight to it. Cole, she said softly, are you telling me about a school? Or are you giving me a reason to stay? He looked straight up at the sky, just like she was. I reckon I am telling you both, he said. It is up to you to decide which one is your answer. She was quiet for a long while before she spoke. The baby is going to need a name. That is true, he said. I have thought about it for 3 weeks and cannot settle on one. She looked at her hands resting on the rail. Thomas had a name picked out. He told me in a letter. She paused. He said if it was a girl, he wanted her named for the first honest thing that happened after all the lies. She looked right at Cole then. He wrote that hoping, not knowing. He never got to see the truth come out. Cole looked at this woman, who had survived on pure grit and stubborn will, a woman more afraid of failing her family than of fighting for them. She was going to stand up in a courthouse and say what needed saying. What was the name? He asked her. Verity, she said. It means truth. A clean, cold wind blew across the snow. That is a good name, Cole said. And as she turned to go inside, he held the door, and the warmth of the little cabin reached out for them both. They set out for Billings 4 days later. Piton had been arrested at his office. The wire from Garrett said it was disappointing, that a man responsible for at least 9 deaths should have put up more of a fight. Holt was taken at the North Shaft, and its 300 workers were sent home with pay under federal order. Driscoll, the sheriff, showed up at the ranch the morning they were to leave. He came alone with no badge on his coat and his hat in his hands. He stood on the porch looking like a man who had wrestled with his own past and lost. I want to speak to Mrs. McBride, he said. Cole stepped back and called her name. She came to the doorway, her coat on, and just stood there, waiting. I knew about the notebook, Driscoll began. Not what was in it, but I knew Thomas McBride was keeping one, and I knew Piton wanted it. When they told me he had an accident, I filed the report they gave me. I did not ask questions. He looked her straight in the eye. I am sorry, Mrs. McBride. For all of it. Eleanor stood there for a long moment. Did you have a choice? She asked. It was a fair question. Not a good one, Driscoll admitted. But I had one. Then I accept your apology, Sheriff, she said. And I suggest that when the federal court asks about that warrant, you tell them exactly what you just told me. A man who makes a bad choice and then tells the truth about it is different from one who does not. The court will see that. Driscoll nodded, put on his hat, and rode away. A man on a different side of the line now. That was generous, Cole said, standing beside her. It was accurate, she replied. There is a difference. The journey to Billings took 2 days. Clara sang songs she made up as she went, while James watched the land go by as if memorizing the way home. Cole rode alongside them. On the second evening, with the lights of Billings twinkling in the distance, Eleanor said, Thomas asked me to marry him in a schoolroom. Cole looked over at her. I was grading papers. He had come to fix the stovepipe. He was awful at it. Took him 3 visits over 2 weeks to get it right. The warmth in her voice was like a sunrise after a long, cold night, a feeling that hurts and is precious all at once. On his third visit, she said, he admitted he'd been making it worse on purpose, just so he'd have a reason to come back. She looked toward the town lights. I told him that was the sorriest excuse for a courtship I'd ever heard of. He said being efficient wasn't the point. The point was showing up. She went quiet for a second. He showed up every single day for the rest of his life. Cole rode quiet beside her. Sounds like a man worth seeing this through for, he said gently. He was, she answered. He is. They got to Billings the next morning. Garrett met them at the edge of town with 2 more deputies, looking like a man in a hurry. Peaton's lawyers are already trying to get it all thrown out, Garrett said with no preamble. They're claiming your husband's papers are private property we took without a warrant. He walked alongside Cole's horse. The new judge, a fellow named Forsythe, he denied it. But they're going to fight us on every single piece of paper. He looked at Eleanor. They're going to say your copies are fakes. Then I'll recite the originals from memory, Eleanor said, her voice like steel. Word for word, if that's what it takes. The hearing is in 2 days, Cole said. Good, she replied. I have been ready for 8 months. The federal courthouse in Billings was one of those big stone buildings meant to impress you. Cole had seen plenty of courtrooms, but he had never felt a room go as quiet as when Eleanor McBride walked in. It was full of lawyers and townsfolk, all there to finally see the truth. She walked tall in a simple dark dress, the last of her husband's money well spent. With her ink-stained fingers and carrying her child, she took the witness stand as if it were a throne. The company's lawyer was a slick man from Chicago named Voss. For an hour, he let her explain about her husband's notebook. Then he stood up, wearing the smirk of a man who had been tearing people apart on the stand for 20 years. Mrs. McBride, Voss said, his voice dripping with false patience, you have no legal training. Why should this court believe you understand what you saw in those ledgers? I taught math for 9 years, she answered, her voice clear and steady. I can read a ledger, and I can understand a contract. It does not take a lawyer. It just takes attention to detail. You have said your copies were from memory. From the notebook, and from memory, she corrected. Then she leaned forward slightly. Let us put it to the test. You pick any page from the company's real ledger over there. I will recite it for you from memory right now. A stir went through the crowd. The lawyer, Voss, looked like he had been slapped. That will not be necessary, he sputtered. On the contrary, Judge Forsythe said, a small smile on his face, I think it is very necessary. Voss grabbed a page from the ledger. He read the first line aloud. Eleanor recited the rest of the page without pausing. It back word for word, including the date and account numbers. Voss flipped to another page. She recited that one perfectly, too, even the small cross-reference notes Voss himself had to search for. The crowd in the gallery started whispering. Mrs. McBride, Voss said, his tone shifting. He was a man who just realized his map of the land was wrong. Your husband was, as you said, very invested in this. Is it not possible his notes show what he wanted to find, not the objective facts? Thomas was an accountant, she replied simply. Accountants write down what the numbers say. Those numbers came from Peaton's own books, copied exactly. If the documents show a conclusion, it was Augustus Peaton's conclusion when he wrote the numbers down, not my husband's when he copied them. For the next 40 minutes, Voss tried to trip her up, but Eleanor met every question with the same calm precision. She was a woman who knew this material better than the lawyer paid to fight it. Cole took the stand the next day. He looked at the room and told them plain and clear what happened at Cleville. He talked about the real report and the fake one his supervisor told him to sign. He spoke the 7 names that had been erased. He listed them one by one, and a hush fell over the courtroom as if something long lost had finally been put back in its rightful place. Voss questioned him for an hour. Cole answered every question with the same directness he had learned from Eleanor, and from years of working with horses instead of men. When Voss asked why he stayed quiet for 2 years after leaving the agency, Cole answered, "Because I was wrong to. I knew it then, but I did not do anything about it. Not until a woman in a blizzard drove a knife into a wagon board just to stand up. And I figured if she could do that, I could do this." The gallery was completely silent. Voss sat down. On the third day, Garrett took the stand. He laid out 16 months of investigation, showing the pattern of accidents, the payments, and the whole corrupt system built by Piton. Thomas McBride's notebook laid out the whole crooked story, and Cole's old files proved it was all true. That man was on the stand for 4 hours. He took his time making sure every single word hit its mark. He spoke like a man who had waited a long time for this day and was going to make it count. Piton just sat there at the defense table all dressed up in a fancy suit. He watched it all fall apart, still trying to figure a way out of the mess he made. Cole had seen that look before on plenty of men who built their fortunes on the backs of folks they thought were too scared to ever speak up. They are always wrong. On the 5th day, the verdict came. Guilty. Guilty on 11 counts, from fraud and trafficking to conspiracy. Hall was found guilty on 7 counts of his own. Even Judge Alderman had been arrested and started naming names to save his own skin. 3 of those names were men sitting right there in the courtroom, and federal deputies hauled them out before the afternoon was over. Piton's lawyer filed for an appeal right away, just like Garrett said he would. But Piton would not get bail. The judge had read Thomas's notebook and knew exactly the kind of man he was dealing with. When the verdict was read, Eleanor sat tall between Cole and James, with little Clara asleep on her shoulder. She did not move a muscle. James reached out and took his mother's hand. She squeezed it back, her eyes fixed forward, her jaw set hard. She held all that pain and struggle inside for 1 long minute. Then she let out a slow, deep breath. It was the sound of a woman finally putting down a heavy burden she had carried for 8 long months. Outside on the courthouse steps, Garrett came over to them. He shook Cole's hand and looked at Eleanor with that same determined expression. "Your testimony was the foundation of it all," Garrett told her. "Without that notebook, without you, he would have found a way to slip through." He paused. "Thomas built the case, but you are the one who delivered it." Eleanor looked him right in the eye. "The 7 men from Colville," she said. "Will their names be in the record?" "Every last one of them," Garrett promised. "In every document this case produces from now on." She gave one firm nod. "Then it is finished." Garrett tipped his hat and went back inside to finish his work. James looked up at Cole. "What happens now?" he asked. Cole looked at the boy, at the strong woman beside him, and at the little girl now awake and studying the big courthouse columns. "Now," Cole said with a small smile, "we go home." They got back to Copper Falls in the first week of December. A deep, heavy snow had settled over the land, the kind that was not going anywhere until spring. The old school building was still there, just like Cole said it would be. It was solid and well built. Eleanor walked through it by herself that first afternoon while Cole watched the children back at the ranch. The dog, Deputy, watched Cole, seeming to know the situation better than the people did. Eleanor returned with a list she had written on a scrap of brown paper. It was a list of supplies. She put it on the table right between them. Cole looked it over. "You will need a second bookshelf," he said. "I know. Can you build one?" "I can build 2, he answered. She looked at him from across the table. The fire crackled, and the kids were quiet in the back room. Deputy was snoozing by the hearth. "Cole," she started, and he waited for her to go on. "You asked me what I needed," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I told you I needed someone who shows up every day." Her eyes met his. "I need you to know that is what I mean. Not a big rescue. Just someone who shows up." He held her gaze. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and certain. "I walked a lame horse 4 miles in a blizzard. I stood on your porch with a shotgun for 12 hours. I testified in a federal court against a man who pays to have people disappear." He leaned forward just a bit. "I reckon I know how to show up." For the first time, he saw her face completely change. The guard she kept up finally fell away. The strong jaw, the steady hands, all of it softened. She reached across the table and took his hand. It was a firm, sure grip, the hand of a woman who was done being afraid. He held it right back. Verity Callahan was born on the 21st of December, the longest night of the year. Clara said that was perfect, because it meant the baby had the whole night to herself, which is just how important people ought to arrive. Eleanor's hands were still trembling, so Cole knew he had to be the steady one. He looked down at the tiny red face and balled-up fists, thinking of her grandfather, Thomas McBride, who raced against time to write the truth down by lamplight. "Verity," Eleanor said from the bed. Her voice was tired but fierce. "Her name is Verity." Cole brought the baby to her. Eleanor held her daughter for the very first time, with the look of a woman who had fought through pure hell to be here. She was not sentimental, just completely present, earning this moment with everything she had. In the doorway, James stood with Clara asleep on his shoulder. He watched his mother and sister with those careful eyes that had protected his family for years. And for the first time, Cole saw those eyes finally rest. The school opened that January with 11 students. The new teacher told them all that any paper you can read is a paper you can understand, and a paper you can understand can never be used against you. Word spread the way it does in a small town. By February, they had 19 students. By March, the school board from 3 counties over wanted to know what was happening in Copper Falls to make their children ask such smart questions. Eleanor McBride, who became Eleanor Hargrove on a quiet Sunday, wrote them back. She told them simple and plain what she was doing. She was teaching them to read everything. Cole put up a second bookshelf in March. He had to build a third one in April because Eleanor's books were multiplying like rabbits. She swore it was not her fault, and he swore it was. It was the kind of argument that ends in that special kind of laughter between two people who have walked through fire and found each other on the other side. Garrett sent word from Billings. The courts had denied Peaton's appeal. Holt's conviction was going to stick. The federal record was permanent. The names were in it for good. The northern mine was shut down tight, pending a safety check by 3 honest engineers Garrett had picked himself. Driscoll turned in his badge and went to work at a feed store 1 county over. Garrett wrote that it seemed a fitting end for a man who made a bad choice, then a better one. The names of the 7 men from Colville went into the official record. So did a long list Garrett filed of every single person the Peaton Mining Company had wronged. Thomas McBride's notebook made sure that list was painfully long. On a late spring morning, the ranch was finally alive with green fields and new horses. Clara was chattering, James was asking questions, and baby Verity was letting everyone know her opinions loud and clear. Eleanor sat on the porch with her coffee and her daddy's notebook. She was not reading the evidence anymore. She was reading the back pages, where a man was just writing for himself. She sat in the courthouse square, the morning air still and quiet. Cole came and sat down on the steps next to her. She did not close the notebook. "He wrote about you," she told him, her voice steady. Cole just looked at her. It was the last entry he ever made from the November right before the wreck. She turned to that final page, holding the book so he could see the writing. It was Thomas McBride's hand, small and careful. The kind of writing from a man who knew any words could be his last, so he made sure they counted. He wrote that if the worst should happen, there was only one man he trusted to have the nerve and the reason to use his papers. A former Pinkerton agent named Cole Hargrove. A man who quit rather than sign his name to a lie. She paused, letting him read. He wrote that he did not know how to find you. He wrote that he hoped you found Eleanor instead. For a long time, Cole did not say a word. "He wrote it," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. 3 weeks before it all happened, on a bright Montana spring morning. The kind of bright that makes you understand why folks put down roots in this land and never let go. You could hear Verity's voice hollering from an open window, making demands like a 5-month-old who already figured the world ought to run on her schedule. And then you could hear Clara's voice, answering her little sister with all the patience of a 6-year-old who had made herself the main teacher in the house. Then came the sound of James's boots on the porch, walking toward the door. The footsteps stopped. He must have seen his mother and Cole on the steps and decided, with a quiet wisdom, to give them their minute. Eleanor gently closed the notebook. She held it for a moment with both hands, the same way she had clutched it through the blizzard, through the hearing, and all the days in between. Then she set it down on the step beside her, careful and respectful. It was the way you put something down, not when you are letting it go, but when you are finally letting yourself be outside of it. She looked out toward the pasture, where the horses moved in the early light. The fence Cole had fixed back in March stood straight and strong, and the cottonwood trees along the edge of the property were getting their leaves back. "He found you," she said. It was not to Cole and not to herself. She just set it out into the morning air, a fact that was plain and certain. It was the sound a truth makes when it is finally given the space it always deserved. Cole reached over and took her hand. Thomas McBride had stood up for what was right every single day of his life, right until the day they made certain he could not anymore. But in the notebook he left behind, in the names he refused to let be forgotten, he was still standing up. He was standing up in the woman he trusted to carry that truth, and in the man he had hoped would help her bring it all the way home. Thomas had made the world a more honest place just by being in it. That was the whole story, the final measure of the man. It was true long before any federal record, and it would stay true long after the courthouse papers turned to dust. He was a man who kept his promise to the truth, right up to his last breath, and she was the woman who carried that promise the rest of the way. Together, the two of them had made sure that the things done in the dark were dragged out into the sunlight. They were named, they were recorded, and they were set down for good where nobody could ever bury them again. And that was enough. That was everything. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.